Hello and welcome to The Political Sphere, the show focusing on the biggest stories in politics in the last week. I'm Lawrence Jeffcoat and here are the biggest stories in politics in the last week. And firstly, in US news this week we saw a BuzzFeed News article which reported that US President Donald Trump had directed his former attorney Michael Cohen to lie to Congress about negotiations of a Trump Tower in Moscow, Russia. This would thus give the implication that the president had instructed someone to lie to Congress, obstructing justice, which could be cause for impeachment. But the real story here is that Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office had issued a press release in response to this article and said in a rare move that the reporting was not accurate. BuzzFeed has since stood by their reporters and their sources, who are, quote, federal law enforcement officials involved in an investigation of the matter. The White House has also called the reporting categorically false. In a statement, Ben Smith, the editor-in-chief at BuzzFeed, stated, "We stand by our reporting and the sources who informed it, and we urge the special counsel to make clear what he's disputing." Peter Carr, a spokesman for Robert Mueller's office, in a statement said, "BuzzFeed's description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate." President Trump this week also made a statement to the public about the ongoing government shutdown and border wall funding. The president offered what he called a common sense compromise, which included $5.7 billion that the president wanted for his wall, 3 years of legislative help for 700,000 DACA recipients, including work permits, social security, and protection from deportation. This also included a 3-year extension to temporary protected status for 300,000 immigrants facing expiration of their TPS. Democrats such as Speaker Nancy Pelosi stated that they would rather see the government reopen and then negotiate about how they can deal with immigration and border wall funding. Nancy Pelosi this week also sent a letter to the president to inform him, due to the government shutdown, he would not be able to do the State of the Union address from the House. This was in response to a letter earlier from the president addressing security concerns of the shutdown and confirming that January 29th would be when the State of the Union would have been. Although we saw the president later confirm on Twitter that he would not give the State of the Union address on the 29th and wait for the government to reopen. Stating, "As the shutdown was going on, Nancy Pelosi asked me to give the State of the Union address. I agreed. She then changed her mind because of the shutdown, suggesting a later date. This is her prerogative. I will do the address when the shutdown is over. I am not looking for an alternative venue for the State of the Union address because there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a, quote, great State of the Union address in the near future." And continuing with US news now, most likely in late February we will see a meeting between the US and North Korea once more. Multiple news sources have stated that the meeting will most likely take place in Vietnam. This week, US President Donald Trump met with nuclear envoy for North Korea Kim Jong-chol, a meeting which the president described as incredible and with a lot of progress being made. The US and North Korea last met in June last year in Singapore. And lastly, in US news this week, we saw that the US Senator from California and former Attorney General of California, Kamala Harris, had announced that she would run in the 2020 election for the Democrats as a presidential candidate. Ms. Harris, if elected, would not only be the first female president of the United States, but also the first female African-American elected to president of the United States. Ms. Harris announced her intention to run on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a day which commemorates the actions of the famous civil rights leader. Ms. Harris also joined several other prominent Democrats, including Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Julian Castro, in running for the candidacy for 2020. And in Australian news this week, we saw Minister for Women and Minister for Jobs and Industrial Relations, Kelly O'Dwyer, announce she would resign from federal politics. Miss O'Dwyer joins a number of Liberal women who will not be contesting the next election, although Miss O'Dwyer has said that her reasons for leaving federal politics are purely personal. Miss O'Dwyer has held the seat of Higgins since 2009. And lastly, in Australian political news this week, we saw Grant Shultz losing the endorsement from the New South Wales Liberals for the seat of Gilmore in the next federal election. The PM announced this week that former Labor Party President Warren Mundane would contest for the seat in the next election. Since losing the endorsement from New South Wales Liberals, Mr. Shultz has announced that he would stand as an independent, making the election a lot more tougher for the coalition in the next federal election. Mr. Mundane does have family connections to the seat, although he does not currently reside there. In the last federal election in 2016, former coalition MP and then incumbent Anne Pseudomalis only won the seat by 1.4%. And firstly, in international news this week, we saw protests on the steps of Greek Parliament about another country wanting to change their name. That country being the northern neighbour of Greece, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, wanting to change their name to the Republic of North Macedonia. The reason for the protests is because in elements of Greek culture, the name Macedonia, which is also a Greek state, is seen as something which is fundamentally Greek. The deal between the governments of Greece and Macedonia would allow Macedonia entry into NATO, with Greece allowing them to enter by voting for their favour. The Greek PM has faced 2 votes of no confidence so far over the issue. Ratification debate has already started, but a vote on the matter is due by the end of the week. Continuing with international news now, and potentially a situation which may make the whole war in Syria a lot more complicated, Israel this week announced that they had launched missiles into Syria targeting Iranian targets in Syria, which they said launched missiles towards Israel, more specifically the Golan Heights, an area which borders both Syria and Lebanon. Russian Defense Control Center announced this week that more than 30 Israeli missiles were destroyed by Syrian countermeasures, and Russian news agency RIA News says that there were 6 wounded and 4 dead in an attack targeting a Damascus airport. And lastly, in international news this week, we saw US embassy officials given 72 hours to leave Venezuela after the US supported opposition leader Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela, essentially labelling the Maduro administration as illegitimate. The US had said they would not remove any of their embassy officials as the Maduro administration had no authority to do so. The break in diplomatic relations has come after failed military uprisings against the Maduro administration. Opposition leader Juan Guaido has sworn himself in as the interim president as well. Russia, China, and Turkey have criticised the US for this move, and Russia specifically has also warned the US against military intervention in Venezuela. The situation in Venezuela is very complex, and I've linked some links in the description below about the actual footage of the protests. There's many protests occurring, and I'd suggest that you take a look at those to get a more in-depth look at what's really going on the ground in Venezuela. To see more about these stories, check the description below. Be sure to like the video and comment what you thought about the past week in the political sphere. Also check the description for other political stories which may gauge your interest, including Trump's military transgender ban being supported by the Supreme Court and an Australian writer being detained in China. Stick around and be sure to tune in next week.